They poured the foundation while I was out of town. That is how this whole thing started. I left for 4 days to go trout fishing with an old buddy up near the state line. No cell service, no noise, just river and pine trees. When I came back, there was concrete where my driveway used to be. Not cracked concrete, not some temporary barrier. A full, freshly poured foundation with steel rebar sticking up into the air like ribs. And it was sitting right across the only road that leads to my house. I own 8 acres in western North Carolina, about 20 minutes outside a town most people have never heard of unless they pass through on their way to Asheville. It is mostly pine and hardwood, a long, narrow stretch of land that opens into a clearing where my cabin sits. I bought it in 2010 after my divorce. Back then I needed quiet more than anything. The land gave me that. There is one driveway. It comes off the county road and winds about 300 feet through the trees before it reaches my place. It is not fancy. Gravel packed tight. I maintain it myself. Every spring, I spread fresh stone. Every fall, I clear leaves. After storms, I am out there with a chainsaw cutting fallen limbs. That road is not just convenience. It is access. It is the difference between living there and not. According to the survey I had done when I bought the property, that entire driveway sits squarely inside my boundary lines. No easements. No shared access. Clean and simple. For years, nobody questioned it. Then the Millers moved in. Their real names are not the Millers, but let us call them that. Scott and Lila Miller. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. He worked in tech, remote job. She ran some kind of branding agency out of Charlotte. They bought the 5-acre parcel next to mine, the one that had been sitting vacant forever, overgrown and ignored. I remember the first time I met Scott. I was dragging branches off my driveway after a summer thunderstorm. He pulled up in a shiny black SUV, rolled down his window, big friendly smile. "Hey neighbor," he said, "just closed on the place next door. We are building a modern farmhouse. Figured we would introduce ourselves. Modern farmhouse. Out here." I shook his hand. "Welcome to the woods," I said. He asked about the area, about internet service, about how bad the winters were. I told him what I tell everyone. It is quiet. It is slow. It is not for everybody. He laughed and said, "That is exactly why we bought it. We need an escape from the city chaos." He glanced down my driveway while we talked. Long look. I did not think much of it at the time. Construction started about a month later. Clearing trees, bringing in equipment. Big trucks rumbling down the county road. I kept to myself. I have nothing against development as long as it stays where it belongs. About 6 weeks after they broke ground, I left for that fishing trip. When I came back, I turned off the county road like I had done thousands of times, eased into my driveway, and drove maybe 50 feet before I saw it. Gray concrete stretching across the width of my driveway. Forms still bolted to the sides. Rebar rising in neat vertical lines. The beginnings of what was clearly going to be a 2-car garage. Right on top of my road. I just sat there with the engine idling. For a moment, my brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe they were staging materials. Maybe it was temporary. Then I realized the forms were anchored deep. This was not temporary. They had poured a foundation on my land. I got out of the truck and walked up to it. Ran my hand over the edge. Still rough from the pour. There was no gap. No way around. On both sides of the driveway, thick woods and a steep drop toward a creek. You could not just swing wide and drive around unless you wanted to flip your vehicle. I pulled out my phone and called Scott. He answered on the second ring. Cheerful. "Hey man, what is up?" "What is up," I said, "is that there is a garage foundation blocking my driveway." Silence for a beat. Then, "Oh yeah, that. We thought that strip was part of our lot." "No, it is not," I said. "I have a survey. That driveway is entirely on my property." He exhaled slowly like I was the one being difficult. "Our builder measured from the road. The county map shows a different line than what you were describing." "The county map is not a survey," I said. "You cannot just build over someone's access because a website looks different." There was another pause. Then he said something that still rings in my ears. "Look, even if it is a little over, we are already this far in. You can just come around through the trees for now. We will figure it out later. Come around through the trees." As if my home was some campsite you bushwhack into. I felt heat rise in my chest. There is no coming around. That is my only access. You need to stop construction immediately. His tone shifted. Harder now. Our contractor says we are within our boundary. If you think otherwise, you can talk to a lawyer. And just like that, neighborly smiles were gone. I hung up and just stood there staring at that slab of concrete. It is a strange feeling, seeing something permanent sitting where it has no right to be. Concrete is confidence. It says, we are not moving. I backed my truck out, parked along the county road, and walked the rest of the way in through the woods, scratching my arms on branches, stepping over rocks, feeling like a trespasser on my own land. That walk did something to me. Up until that moment, I believed this was probably a misunderstanding, a measurement error, something that could be sorted out with a handshake. But as I pushed through brush to reach my own front porch, I realized something else. They had poured that foundation while I was gone, and that did not feel accidental. I did not sleep much that night, not because I was worried about losing the land. I had the paperwork. I had the survey from when I bought the property, stamped, sealed, recorded with the county. What kept me up was the feeling that someone had tested me, like they looked at the quiet guy in the woods and figured he would not push back. By sunrise, I had already dug the survey out of my filing cabinet and spread it across my kitchen table. I traced the boundary line with my finger, slow and deliberate. The driveway sat comfortably inside my property by a good 12 feet at its narrowest point. 12 feet is not a rounding error. I called my attorney, David Klein. I had used him years ago when I refinanced the cabin. Good man. Local. Did not wear flashy suits or throw around Latin words to sound important. David listened without interrupting while I explained everything. They poured a foundation across your only access point, he repeated. Yes, and construction is ongoing. Looks like it. Bring me your survey and any photos you have. Do not engage with them further until we talk. I drove into town that morning, parked along Main Street, and walked into his office. There is something steadying about a small-town law office. Wood paneling, old framed maps on the walls, the faint smell of coffee and paper. David studied the survey for a long time. He pulled up the county GIS map on his computer, compared it to the recorded plat, then leaned back in his chair. This is clean, he said. The driveway is yours. Entirely. They are well over the line. So what happens now? Now we send a formal demand. They remove the structure. If they refuse, we seek an injunction and an order for removal. He said it calmly, like he was discussing fence repair, not a concrete garage. We drafted a letter that afternoon. It gave them 10 days to cease construction and remove all encroachments from my property. 10 days felt generous, but David insisted courts appreciate reasonableness. The letter went out certified. 3 days later, I heard the nail guns again. Not just nail guns. Framing hammers. A compressor kicking on. I drove to the end of the county road and watched as their crew continued building on top of that foundation. Studs were going up. Walls taking shape. I got out and walked over. Scott was there, hands on hips, watching the progress like a proud father at a Little League game. Did you get the letter? I asked. Yeah, he said, barely looking at me. Our attorney is reviewing it. So why are you still building on my property? He finally turned toward me. Because until a judge tells us to stop, we are proceeding under the assumption our builder was correct. Your builder was not correct. That is your opinion. I laughed, but it was not funny. It was that short, disbelieving laugh you let out when someone says something so detached from reality, you almost admire the confidence. You are building a permanent structure across my only access, I said. You understand how insane that sounds, right? He shrugged. You are blowing this out of proportion. We are talking about a strip of gravel. We can work out an easement. There it was. An easement. He wanted legal permission to keep his garage where my driveway sat, which meant I would permanently give up control of my own access point. Work out an easement, I repeated. He nodded like he was offering me a gift. We could compensate you for the inconvenience. Inconvenience. I looked past him at the frame of the garage rising from the slab. This was not a mistake. This was a strategy. Pour fast. Build fast. Make it expensive to undo. Then pressure the quiet neighbor into settling. You poured that foundation while I was out of town, I said. His expression flickered just slightly. Timing worked out that way. Right. I left before I said something I would regret. 2 days later, David called me into his office again. The Millers had retained a large firm out of Charlotte. The response letter was 4 pages long, full of confident language about reliance on contractor measurements and alleged ambiguities in mapping data. They proposed negotiating a formal shared access agreement that would allow them to maintain the garage where it stood in exchange for financial compensation. David slid the letter across the desk. They are trying to corner you, he said. They think if they keep building, you will not want to deal with the headache of tearing it down. So what do? We file for immediate injunctive relief, which is lawyer language for, we ask a judge to make them stop and remove it. The hearing was set 6 weeks out. 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, the garage became a full structure. Sheathing, roof trusses, a partial shingle job. It looked almost finished from the outside. Every nail they drove felt like a challenge. Neighbors started talking. Small community, word travels. Some people avoided eye contact when I saw them in town, like they did not want to pick sides. Others quietly told me they could not believe the nerve. One evening, my closest neighbor on the other side, an older man named Harold, stopped by. I have been here 40 years, he said, leaning on my porch railing. I have seen boundary disputes, but I have never seen someone build first and argue later. I did not know whether to feel validated or exhausted. The day of the hearing arrived gray and humid. The courtroom was small, wooden benches, ceiling fans turning slowly overhead. The Millers sat across the aisle with their attorney, a sharp-looking woman in a tailored suit who seemed mildly irritated to be in a rural courthouse. Scott avoided my eyes. When our case was called, David stood and laid out the facts simply. Recorded survey. Clear boundary. Photographs of the structure blocking my sole means of access. The judge, a middle-aged man named Judge Harper, asked one question. Does the defendant dispute the accuracy of the recorded survey? Their attorney shifted slightly. We believe there may be discrepancies between. The judge held up a hand. Do you have a competing survey? No, Your Honor. Then the recorded survey stands. He did not raise his voice. He did not lecture. He simply stated it like gravity. He reviewed the photos again, then looked directly at Scott and Lila. You built a permanent structure that encroaches on your neighbor's property and obstructs his access, he said. That is not a minor inconvenience. That is a substantial interference with property rights. The courtroom was silent. I am ordering the defendants to remove the encroaching structure in its entirety within 14 days. If they fail to do so, the plaintiff is authorized to arrange removal and seek recovery of all associated costs. 14 days. That was it. Outside the courthouse, Scott finally looked at me. You really want to do this, he said, voice tight. I did not answer right away. I looked at him the same way I had looked at that slab of concrete weeks earlier. I did not start this, I said quietly. I just want my driveway back. The 14 days passed. The garage remained. The 14th day came and went without so much as a hammer being lifted. I drove by that structure every morning on my way out to work, parking along the county road and cutting through the woods like I had been doing for weeks, and every morning it stood there, framed, roofed, wrapped in house paper, looking more permanent by the hour. If you did not know the story, you would think it had always belonged there. On the 15th morning, I made a phone call. Tony Ramirez owns a small excavation company about 10 miles from me. Good operator. Honest. The kind of guy who shows up early and does not waste words. You still got that excavator available? I asked. For what kind of job? Structure removal. Pause. Is this the one we talked about? Yeah. You got paperwork. Court order signed and stamped. Another pause. Then, all right. I will bring the 320. We will need a dump trailer and a couple laborers. We notified the sheriff's department the day before, not because I expected violence, but because I have learned that when money and ego collide, people get unpredictable. The deputy I spoke to sounded almost bored. As long as you have the order, you are within your rights, he said. We will have a unit swing by. That morning the sky was clear, blue in a way that almost felt disrespectful given the tension sitting in my chest. Tony's crew rolled in just after 8. Diesel engines growling, hydraulic arms clanking into position. Scott's house was quiet at first. Curtains drawn. No movement. I stood beside David, who had come to document the process. He had a folder under his arm and a look on his face that said he had seen enough human stubbornness for one lifetime. You ready? He asked. No, I said, but I am done waiting. Tony climbed into the cab of the excavator. The machine rumbled to life. For a second, everything felt suspended, like the moment before a storm breaks. Then the bucket came down. It hit the side wall of the garage with a crack that echoed through the trees. Wood splintered. Nails screamed as they tore loose. The wall folded inward like it had been made of cardboard instead of 2x4s. That was when Scott came running out of his house. What the hell do you think you are doing? He shouted, jogging toward us, face red, phone in his hand. I did not move. I handed him a copy of the order. You had 14 days, I said. You cannot just destroy someone's property. The deputy's cruiser rolled up slowly behind him, tires crunching on gravel. The deputy stepped out, calm as could be. "Sir," he said to Scott, "the court authorized this action." Scott looked from me to the deputy to the excavator, which had already taken down a second section of wall. The roof sagged, then collapsed inward in a burst of dust and shingles. Lila appeared behind him, arms wrapped around herself, eyes wide. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "This did not have to happen," Scott said, voice cracking now. "We could have worked something out." "You tried to work something out," I replied, "by building first and negotiating later." Tony maneuvered the excavator with surgical precision. He broke apart the framing, peeled back the roof, then turned his attention to the concrete slab. The sound of concrete cracking under hydraulic pressure is something you do not forget. It is deep, final. Rebar twisted and snapped as the bucket pried chunks of foundation out of the earth. Each piece loaded into the dump trailer felt like another layer of tension lifting off my shoulders. It took less than 6 hours. By mid-afternoon, the driveway was clear. Scarred, yes. Ruts from heavy equipment, broken gravel pushed aside. But open. Open. I walked down the length of it slowly once the crew packed up. The pine trees stood quiet, like they had been holding their breath too. For the first time in weeks, I could drive straight from the county road to my front porch without stepping through brush. Scott did not speak to me again that day. 2 weeks later, I was served with papers. He was suing me for $18,000 in alleged construction losses, claiming wrongful destruction of property and emotional distress. Emotional distress. David barely raised an eyebrow when I brought the documents to his office. "He is flailing," he said. The hearing on that claim lasted maybe 20 minutes. The judge reviewed his own prior order, looked at Scott, and asked a simple question. "Did you comply with the removal deadline?" "No, Your Honor." "Then you assumed the risk of loss." Case dismissed. Not only dismissed, but the judge ordered Scott to reimburse my legal fees and pay an additional $3,500 for damage their construction equipment had caused to my tree line and drainage ditch. When we walked out of that courthouse the second time, Scott did not look angry anymore. He looked smaller. That might sound cruel. I did not mean it that way. I just mean the confidence was gone. The certainty that money and momentum could bend reality in his favor had drained out of him. Over the next few months, they finished their house, adjusted plans, moved the garage footprint fully onto their land. We did not speak. We nodded occasionally if we passed each other on the road, the way strangers do. I repaired my driveway myself. Fresh gravel. Reseeded the shoulder where the excavator had torn up dirt. Planted 3 new saplings where trees had been damaged. Life returned to its rhythm. But something in me had shifted. Before all this, I believed most conflicts were misunderstandings. That if you explained yourself calmly enough, people would meet you halfway. Now I understand something different. Some people test boundaries not because they are confused, but because they are calculating. They assume you will fold to avoid conflict. They assume you will accept inconvenience to keep the peace. And sometimes, maybe most of the time, they are right. I think about that first conversation with Scott, when he said we could work out an easement, compensate me for the inconvenience. I wonder if, in his mind, he truly believed he was being reasonable. Maybe from where he stood, it was just business, just numbers on paper. But to me, it was never about money. It was about the simple idea that if you buy land, maintain it, pay taxes on it, and respect your neighbors, you should not have to fight to keep access to your own front door. People sometimes ask if I regret not settling. Honestly, no. Not because I enjoyed the fight. I did not. There were weeks I felt drained, distracted, angry in a way I am not proud of. But if I had backed down, that garage would still be sitting across my driveway, a daily reminder that I let someone push past a clear line. Now, when I turn off the county road and drive that 300 feet through the trees, I feel something different than before. Not just peace. Ownership. If you have ever dealt with a boundary dispute, an HOA power trip, a neighbor who thinks confidence equals correctness, you know how quickly a small line on a map can turn into something personal. So here's what I want to know. Was I right to push it all the way to demolition, or should I have negotiated and avoided the escalation? At what point does compromise become surrender? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them. I am genuinely curious how other people see it, especially if you have been on the other side of something like this. And if you want more real stories about property disputes, small town drama, and the strange ways people test each other when land and pride are involved. Hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Because sometimes the quietest roads lead to the loudest lessons.